Hello and welcome to Sleepy Science Stories. This is your time to slow down, to let the world outside soften at the edges, and drift somewhere quieter for a while. Tonight, we're going to travel not across galaxies, but deep into the quiet spirals of time hidden inside the trees around us. Beneath every layer of bark lies a secret record of the world's summers and winters, storms and droughts, the rise and fall of entire civilizations, all written in wood. Tree rings are like the Earth's own diary, filled with whispers of sunlight, rainfall, and patience. Together, we'll count the centuries, feel the rhythm of slow growth, and listen to the forest tell its story one ring at a time. If you find peace in these calm science wanderings, a gentle like and a soft tap on subscribe would mean the world. If you have ever stood beside a tree on a quiet day and pressed your hand against its bark, you may have felt something steady beneath the roughness. Not movement exactly, but a kind of presence, as though the tree were breathing in time with the world. Inside that stillness, beneath layers of bark and sap and fiber, there is a spiral of memory forming year after year. Each layer tells of a season, of sunlight and rain, of stillness and growth. The trunk of a tree is more than just support. It is a library written in circles, every ring a chapter in the story of the earth. When a tree is young, the rings are wide, bright, and soft. They tell of energy and abundance, of roots stretching confidently into the soil. As the tree matures, the rings narrow, the wood hardens, and the stories become more detailed. Each spring, as the days lengthen and the air fills with moisture, new cells awaken and begin to divide. These cells swell with water, thin-walled and light-colored, forming the outermost layer of the new ring. It is a season of hope carved into cellulose, a celebration of warmth returning after the long silence of winter. As the months pass and summer deepens, the growth slows. The tree's cells become smaller, darker, and denser, forming a band that marks the close of the season. Together, these pale and dark layers form a single ring. To the eye, it seems simple, but within that circle lies a precise record of time. A wider ring means a generous year, a time when rain and sunlight arrived in perfect balance. A thin ring means a struggle, perhaps a drought, a late frost, or a swarm of insects that nibbled at the leaves. The tree never forgets. Even centuries later, scientists can look at those rings and read them like lines in a journal, tracing patterns of weather and climate long before humans kept written records. There is a quiet humility in how trees record time. They do not measure seconds or hours, but the slow rhythm of the seasons. Their clocks are wound by sunlight and unwound by frost. Each year, they begin again, layering the new over the old, protecting what has already been lived. In this way, trees hold more than their own stories. They hold the memory of the landscape itself. A forest of old pines may reveal a century of gentle rains and sudden fires, while an oak growing beside a river may carry the rhythm of its floods and droughts. The entire history of a region can be whispered from the heart of a single fallen log. Some trees grow so slowly that their rings are almost invisible, packed tightly like the lines of a poem written in miniature. Others, like the bristlecone pines that cling to rocky slopes in California, have been adding rings for more than 5,000 years. When these ancient trees were seedlings, the Great Pyramids were still new, and rivers ran through lands where deserts now sleep. To touch their trunks is to touch time itself, rough and resinous, but still alive. Their hearts hold the echo of every summer that has passed since civilization began to dream of gods and stone. If you could listen closely enough, perhaps you could hear it. Not a sound, exactly, but the faint resonance of years folding into years, like ripples across a pond that never stops moving. Each ring is a heartbeat. Each tree is a slow-moving metronome marking the rhythm of life on Earth. They do not rush or pause or plan. They simply grow, patient and faithful, letting the seasons ride upon them in soft strokes of light and water. And when the time finally comes for them to fall, their stories remain locked in the grain of their wood, waiting for someone, someday, to read them and remember what the world once felt like. When scientists study the heartwood of a tree, they are really studying time itself made tangible. Beneath the outer bark, which feels rough and alive, there lies a world of quiet architecture. The cambium, a paper-thin layer of living tissue, is where new wood is born. Each year, it creates a boundary between past and present, sealing away what has been and making room for what will come. This is the hidden clockwork of the forest, a rhythm so slow that it almost escapes notice, yet constant enough to outlast empires and civilizations. In the cool months of early spring, the tree begins its work. Sap rises from the roots, stirred by warmth and sunlight, and flows through tiny vessels that thread upward like veins. These vessels carry water to the leaves, which in turn capture sunlight and turn it into sugar. The tree feeds itself with light. With each sunrise, energy is tucked away inside its growing ring, stored in the fibers that will one day harden into history. By midsummer, the work becomes more deliberate. The tree's growth slows as the heat deepens and the air dries. The new wood that forms is darker and denser, holding the memory of long afternoons when rain was scarce. The rhythm continues without pause, a steady conversation between soil and sky. When a drought stretches on, the tree tightens its belt, producing fewer and smaller cells. The resulting ring is thin, a whisper of hardship. When rain returns, the next ring grows wide again, a soft sigh of relief. Through these fluctuations, a tree becomes a natural historian. Entire landscapes can be read in its wood. A wildfire may leave a scar that darkens a single line. A volcanic eruption might dust the air with ash, slowing growth across an entire continent. Even cosmic events, like solar flares, can leave faint traces in the chemical patterns of old timber. The science that deciphers these records is called dendrochronology, a word that sounds almost musical when spoken slowly. It is the art of matching tree rings across time, connecting the life of one tree to another until a pattern emerges that spans millennia. Using these patterns, researchers have traced droughts that lasted for decades, floods that reshaped valleys, and cold spells that turned rivers to ice. Through trees, we have learned how the planet has breathed and sighed over thousands of years. The smallest circle inside a trunk can tell of entire centuries. Yet the story is not only scientific, there is poetry in this kind of patience. Imagine a tree standing through 100 winters. Snow presses on its branches, wind howls across its trunk, yet beneath the bark the cambium quietly waits, ready to wake again when spring arrives. It has no awareness of its endurance. It simply continues, a humble witness to time's unfolding. Some years bring abundance, some bring hardship, but every year leaves its mark. If we could see the world through the eyes of a tree, perhaps we would understand time differently. It would not be something to race through, but something to grow within. Each ring that forms is a promise kept. The tree does not rush to finish its circle. It simply allows it to appear, cell by cell, as water and light dictate. Over decades, these circles become a map of survival, a fingerprint of resilience carved into the living world. When a tree finally dies, those circles remain, preserving the memory of every season it has ever known. Even when transformed into furniture, beams, or paper, the rings remain faintly visible, still whispering of their origin. The story continues, quiet and unhurried, a reminder that time, like wood, is not lost but layered. If you could step inside a forest at dawn and listen carefully, you might begin to sense how deeply time lives here. The trees stand still, but they are never motionless. Beneath the bark, molecules shift and tiny pulses of water rise through narrow channels. The air smells faintly sweet from the breath of leaves and the slow exhale of soil. Every trunk you see is quietly keeping a diary, and together they form the greatest archive the earth has ever written. Each tree holds a memory of its own life, yet all those memories intertwine, echoing one another across the forest floor. When rain falls, the story deepens. Water seeps into the ground, drawn up through roots like ink through a pen. The next growing season begins, and a new ring begins to form. The width of that ring depends on how generous the weather chooses to be. A wet spring leaves a wide pale line, while a dry one leaves only a narrow trace. Over hundreds of years, these differences accumulate until the wood beneath the bark reads like a pulse chart of the planet's moods. Scientists can even line up these patterns from many trees to create a continuous timeline that reaches thousands of years into the past. It is as if the forest has been taking notes while humanity learned to walk, farm, and build. Sometimes the story shifts suddenly. A lightning strike may scar the wood, leaving a streak that never heals. A wildfire might burn the outer bark, sealing the wound beneath a ring of darkened cells. Long after the flames fade, the memory remains, a quiet reminder that the forest has felt both destruction and renewal. In other years, strange events beyond the forest make their mark. The eruption of a volcano can darken skies on the far side of the world, cooling summers and slowing growth in trees that never saw the ash itself. The tree does not know what happened, only that the light dimmed for a while. When researchers read those thin rings centuries later, they can match them with historical accounts of distant eruptions and confirm that the world is more connected than we ever imagined. The tree remembers everything, but without bitterness. It keeps the good years and the bad ones in the same calm circles. Its memory is not emotional, only truthful. Even the soil beneath it joins in the story. Fallen leaves decompose, releasing minerals that feed the roots. Each new ring carries the essence of older lives. A forest is a conversation between generations, conducted entirely through silence. There is something deeply comforting about the idea that a tree's life is recorded not in the rush of moments, but in the patience of years. We measure our lives by minutes, but the forest measures by seasons, by light, by the subtle tilt of the earth. When you press your palm against the trunk of an old tree, you are touching a being that has known hundreds of dawns and sunsets. It has stood through the birth of storms, the migration of animals, the quiet of countless nights. And all the while it has been growing its story, layer by layer, never in haste, never in regret. Even when the tree falls, its memory does not vanish. The rings remain intact, a perfect record waiting to be read. In the hands of a patient scientist or a curious wanderer, the trunk becomes a book. With every circle traced, the story unfolds again. How much it rained, how fiercely the wind blew, how warm the summers were, how cold the winters bit. It is the autobiography of a life lived entirely in stillness. And somehow, by reading it, we find our own sense of time softening. The years no longer feel like something to escape, but something to inhabit gently and fully, as the trees have done all along. When a tree grows, it is not simply stretching toward the sunday. It is negotiating with its surroundings, adjusting its pace according to the warmth of the soil, the length of the days, and the quiet struggles happening in the roots below. Each ring it forms is a response, a delicate record of balance. Some years, when the rain comes too early or too late, the tree hesitates. Other years, when sunlight lingers and the wind is kind, it grows with an ease that can be seen centuries later in the width of a single band of wood. The story that unfolds beneath the bark is not written by the tree alone, but co-authored by everything that touches it. Trees growing together can share their rhythm. When a drought strikes, the rings of neighboring trunks narrow in unison, their stories synchronized by hardship. When a long, wet summer arrives, they all record abundance together. It is as if the entire forest breathes in the same pattern, one great organism spreading across the landscape, keeping time not with clocks but with the rise and fall of clouds. Even species that stand far apart can carry matching rhythms, revealing that weather and water connect them in invisible ways. A scientist studying tree rings from different continents might find that the same thin lines appear in trunks oceans apart, proof that the whole planet moves to a shared pulse. Inside each ring, the cells are shaped by temperature and moisture, but they also hold traces of the air itself. Tiny amounts of carbon become locked within them, a chemical fingerprint of the atmosphere at the time the ring was formed. When we measure that carbon, we can tell not only how old a tree is, but what the air was like when it grew. The ratio of carbon isotopes in ancient wood reveals when the climate cooled, when it warmed, and how quickly it changed. In this way, trees speak softly for the earth, preserving in their hearts the story of the air we all share. They have witnessed shifts in temperature long before we began to measure them, and can remind us of what the planet has already endured. The rings also capture the influence of human life. When forests were cleared, or when cities began to rise, trees that survived nearby recorded the difference. Smoke in the atmosphere, pollution in the rain, even the faint signature of industrial activity can be traced in their growth. It is humbling to realize that our actions, so recent in the span of geological time, are already etched into the wood of the world. The trees have noticed us. They have been quietly taking notes. There is another layer to this connection. Some trees grow beside rivers or lakes, and their rings echo the rhythm of water. High floods leave patterns of compressed growth, while dry years leave gaps of stillness. Along shorelines, mangroves and cypresses record the rise and fall of tides, creating watery calendars that reflect the breathing of the sea. When scientists study these rings together, they see the earth as a single living system. Mountains, oceans, and forests are not separate stories, but chapters of one long book written in many languages. If you ever walk through a grove of old trees, try to imagine the invisible threads that connect them. Each trunk is a column of time, and the air between them hums with shared memory. The forest has been recording every sigh of the wind, every flicker of sunlight, every whisper of rain. The story stretches backward beyond memory, looping through centuries, steady and calm. In that continuity there is comfort. The world may shift and hurry, but the trees will continue to write their slow circular poems, one ring at a time, reminding us that time does not always need to be rushed to be full. There comes a point in every tree's life when growth slows, when the rings near the center of the trunk have become so numerous that they begin to press together. The years still arrive one after another, but they leave subtler traces. The outer bark thickens, the branches lengthen more modestly, and the tree begins to turn its attention inward. Yet even as it ages, it continues to listen to the world around it, adding one more ring for each cycle of the seasons. These final circles are faint, like the soft ending of a long piece of music. They carry the wisdom of everything that came before. When a tree finally falls, its story does not end. The trunk, once a living pillar, becomes a bridge between life and decay. Moss finds the damp crevices between its roots. Fungi bloom along the wood grain, feeding on the same cellulose that once carried sunlight through the tree's veins. Insects tunnel through the rings, rearranging the lines of its history into new shapes. Over time, the fallen log softens and darkens. What was once sturdy becomes tender, returning its stored energy to the soil. Even then, the rings remain visible, faintly shining like ripples caught in the memory of water. Scientists and historians sometimes find these remnants and use them to extend the timeline of life on Earth. By matching the patterns of rings from one log to another, they can trace centuries of climate, drought, and human activity. A beam from an old cathedral, a fragment of shipwreck, or a piece of driftwood can all be read and aligned with the living trees of today. The story of one life joins another, and in this way, the circle continues unbroken. Through these comparisons, the present and the past meet quietly across the grain of wood. Even in death, a tree teaches us how to endure. It shows that endings are not final, only transformations. The nutrients that once supported its leaves now nourish the next generation. The shade that once cooled the forest floor becomes the humus that feeds new roots. Every ring, every fiber, is part of a slow exchange between life and earth. Nothing is wasted, nothing is truly gone. In this patience there is a kind of grace. If you stand in a forest long enough, you may feel that the ground beneath you is alive with memory. Every leaf that falls, every trunk that decays, becomes part of the growing world again. The air smells of soil and rain, the scent of endings turning gently into beginnings. When you touch an old tree, you are touching a mosaic of all that has ever been alive around it. Its rings are quiet but endless, holding the laughter of rainstorms, the warmth of vanished summers, the deep sleep of winter. It is comforting to think that the story of the world is written in such a slow, generous hand. The trees do not hurry, yet they record everything. They have seen ice ages advance and retreat, watched rivers shift, and mountains wear away. Long after our own stories have faded, theirs will still be unfolding, one silent ring at a time. To lie beneath them, listening to the wind move through their leaves, is to feel time itself growing softer. In the rhythm of their roots and the patience of their rings, we are reminded that every life, like every tree, adds something to the great circle of the earth. There is a kind of quiet communication that passes through a forest, a slow conversation that does not depend on words. Beneath the soil, tree roots weave together in hidden networks, touching, sharing, and listening. Through microscopic threads of fungi, known as mycorrhizae, one tree can pass nutrients to another, or warn its neighbors of danger. A dying tree might send its remaining sugars to the seedlings nearby, a final act of generosity written into its very chemistry. Scientists call this the wood wide web, but to stand in a forest and think of it that way feels almost too mechanical. It is something older and softer, an invisible pulse connecting lives through silence. The trees, with all their patient rings, are not alone. They are part of a community that stretches across centuries. When a drought arrives, the trees sense it together. The youngest ones tighten their roots, slowing their thirst. The oldest ones release stored water from deep in their trunks, sharing moisture through the ground. The exchange is delicate and wordless. When fire sweeps through, many perish, yet the network endures underground. From the ashes, new shoots rise, guided by the same roots that once nourished giants. In this way, forests remember themselves. They rebuild not just from seeds but from memory stored in the soil. The rings of a tree are not only a record of its own life, but of all the lives it has touched. If you could peel them back like pages, you might find faint echoes of other trees, traces of shared seasons, hints of light filtered through neighboring leaves. Some trees even grow in rhythmic synchrony with those around them, their rings expanding and narrowing in harmony, a sign of unseen connection. When we read their patterns, we are not just reading one story, but a chorus. Every trunk in the forest adds its own tone to the larger melody of the world. People who study trees often find themselves speaking of them as though they were alive in ways that resemble us. They describe friendships, alliances, even rivalries. There is truth in this, though the trees do not think or plan. They respond, they adapt, they support one another through the slow logic of biology. It is a wisdom that requires no voice and no urgency. Everything that matters to a forest happens in its own time. Sometimes, after heavy rain, you can smell the scent of earth lifting through the roots. It smells faintly of sweetness and stone. That scent is the forest breathing. It carries the whisper of countless roots exchanging minerals and carbon, each tree contributing to the whole. Even fallen trunks, half dissolved into the soil, continue to feed the living. What seems like decay is only another part of the conversation. To walk through such a place is to feel very small and very connected. The wind moves through the canopy with the softness of a sigh, and sunlight drips through the leaves in shifting pools. Beneath your feet, a network older than language hums gently, unseen but constant. You are standing not among individual trees, but within a single living organism that spans the hills and valleys, breathing slowly across generations. The forest teaches patience through its stillness. The trees do not compete in haste. They grow at the pace the world allows, always adding another ring, always listening to the quiet beneath the surface. In their layered wood lies the memory of cooperation, of giving and receiving, of time stretched so long that the boundaries between one life and another blur. And perhaps that is the most beautiful lesson of all. The tree rings are not simply the measure of age, but the shape of connection, the geometry of how life touches life, forming one endless circle that continues long after the last leaf falls. In a way, tree rings are time made visible, and yet they are also time made humble. They do not shout their age or boast of their endurance. They simply keep count quietly, storing the long story of light and shadow within their hearts. If you were to hold a polished cross-section of an ancient trunk in your hands, you would see centuries spread out like ripples on a pond. The darker bands mark the endings of seasons, the lighter ones mark their beginnings. It is a map without borders, a spiral that never truly ends, because even when a tree dies, its rings continue to shape the world around it. Every ring once carried the pulse of living sap. Through those tiny vessels flowed the water that rose from roots and the sugars made by sunlight. They are the frozen pathways of motion, the fossils of breath. In their stillness lies the memory of movement. The tree may stand silent now, but it once spoke fluently in the language of wind and rain. Its rings are not just a measure of time, but of all the elements that passed through it. They tell of bright springs when the rivers overflowed, and of harsh summers when the air cracked with dryness. They tell of neighboring trees that shaded its crown, and of animals that brushed against its bark. They even tell of us, of the forests we cleared and the roads we built, because the trees record not only what nature does, but what we do to nature. When a core sample is taken from a living tree, it does not harm the trunk, only borrows a slender column of wood to read. Through that single piece, scientists can reconstruct histories that stretch far beyond human memory. Droughts that changed civilizations, floods that carved valleys, fires that reshaped the air all leave faint traces in the width and chemistry of those circles. A tree does not intend to keep records, but it does so perfectly. Its accuracy comes from its honesty. It cannot forget or exaggerate. It simply reflects what it has experienced. There is a softness in the idea that time moves not as a line but as a series of circles, one enclosing another. We live our days rushing forward, believing that the future lies somewhere ahead of us, yet the trees remind us that time can also expand inward. Every new layer presses gently against the past, protecting it, surrounding it, carrying it forward intact. The newest ring is always the thinnest, the most delicate, and yet it holds everything that came before it. That is how the world builds itself, not through replacement but through preservation. If you sit beneath a tree long enough, you might start to feel the rhythm of that preservation. The sound of leaves brushing against one another becomes a kind of slow breathing. The ground cools with shade, and the air seems to thicken with age. You can almost imagine the rings forming quietly inside, each one a new whisper added to the story. trees do not look back, but they do not leave their past behind either. They grow by carrying it within them, the way a melody carries all the notes that came before the one you are hearing. When we touch a tree, we are touching not only the present but every moment that led to it. The warmth we feel under our palm is the echo of sunlight gathered long ago, transformed into something solid, dependable, and alive. There is comfort in that continuity. It reminds us that time is not a thing we lose but a thing we become part of. The tree keeps growing, and in some small way, so do we. The world moves gently in circles, and the rings within the wood are its softest proof. When people speak of the wisdom of trees, they are often referring to this quiet understanding of patience. Trees have no need for haste. Their growth is deliberate, their reactions slow, their awareness spread across centuries. A young sapling may seem fragile, bending easily in the wind, but within it the first ring is already forming, a promise of endurance. The second ring will come the next year, and the next, each one layering gently upon the last. It does not plan its future, it simply allows it to unfold. Somewhere in that softness lies the secret to survival. Every season brings both risk and renewal. Spring calls the sap upward, swelling the vessels and awakening the buds. Summer thickens the air and hardens the new wood. Autumn sends a quiet signal for rest, and winter draws a dark boundary that will later become a visible line in the heartwood. The cycle never hurries, it only repeats, steady and sure. The rings that form in this way are more than measurements of age. They are proof of the tree's conversation with the world. They show how the living can adapt to change without fear of it. Some trees, especially those that have weathered centuries of storms, display deep scars within their rings. These scars are not weaknesses but records of resilience. A lightning strike may scorch a section of bark, but the tree will grow around it, enclosing the wound and creating a unique swirl in its pattern. Fire can burn through a forest, yet from the blackened stumps new shoots rise. The memory of destruction becomes part of the design. Each new ring forms with quiet defiance, circling the damage as if to say that even pain has a place in the story of growth. When the rings are studied under a microscope, they reveal more than simple lines of color. They reveal rhythm, texture, and harmony. The spacing between cells changes in response to the subtlest shifts in temperature. Minerals and trace elements from the soil leave faint signatures in the grain. The wood becomes a living record of chemistry and weather, of sunlight filtered through the changing sky. Through it all, the tree continues to add new layers, never stopping to analyze what it records, never judging what each year brings. It simply endures, and by enduring, it teaches. People often find comfort in the company of trees without knowing why. Perhaps it is because their way of being reminds us of what steadiness feels like. They do not demand attention, yet they hold it effortlessly. They have witnessed the rise of cities, the passing of generations, the slow return of rivers to their courses, and they remain rooted. Their patience is not passive but powerful. It is the patience of something that knows how to last. To rest beneath a tree is to borrow a little of its calm. The shade cools the skin, the scent of leaves fills the air, and somewhere above, countless branches sway in patterns older than our own memories. The rings inside are silent, but they speak through this stillness. They remind us that growth does not always need to be visible, that change can happen quietly within, and that even the smallest layer of progress matters. The tree grows by adding thin circles of strength around a living core, and we grow in much the same way, building our understanding ring by ring, year by year, until we too become part of something larger and more enduring than ourselves. If you have ever watched sunlight filter through the canopy of a forest, you will know that time feels different there. The air moves slowly, carrying the scent of moss and the faint sweetness of sap. Every breath seems older, as though it has been exhaled by the leaves themselves. Beneath your feet, the soil is layered with the remains of fallen trunks and leaves that once gathered the same light now touching your face. The forest is not a collection of individual lives, but a single unfolding story told in countless voices. Each tree holds its own rhythm, and every ring inside those trunks hums with memory, blending into a choir of slow, gentle time. In the heart of that stillness, the forest reveals how deeply connected all living things are. The rings within a tree are not boundaries but bridges. They carry nutrients and water, but they also carry history. The inner rings formed when the tree was young remain preserved beneath the new ones, still part of the living structure, still carrying a whisper of the seasons long past. In this way, a tree grows not by shedding its past, but by wrapping it in protection. The oldest parts of its body remain at the center, sheltered and supported, never discarded. Perhaps that is why standing beside a great oak or redwood feels so comforting. It is not just shade or beauty we feel. It is the presence of something that remembers. The forest has been recording the Earth's story for millions of years. Before humans built cities or named the stars, trees were already tracing the shape of the climate, the rhythm of the rains, the pulse of the planet. Their rings hold evidence of volcanic winters, of long droughts and floods, of years when sunlight dimmed after distant eruptions. They even carry traces of radiation from cosmic events, written invisibly into the carbon that forms their structure. Each line is a note in the grand composition of life, and the entire forest is the sheet music of the Earth's memory. When we walk among these trees, we are part of that music, though our presence is brief. Our footprints will fade, our voices will dissolve into air, but the trees will remember that we were here. The carbon from our breath mingles with theirs, cycling through leaves and soil, finding its way into the next ring that forms. In that way, we become part of the story. We contribute to the record, not through words but through the quiet exchange of elements. It is humbling to know that something so patient has already accounted for our presence. As the years pass, forests change. Some are lost to storms or fire. Some expand into open land, and some retreat into the high mountains. Yet the pattern remains. New growth begins where the old ended, continuing the unbroken cycle. Even a charred trunk can give rise to a seedling that will one day cast its own shade. The rhythm of rings begins again. The forest never truly dies. It transforms, layering its own history into the roots of what comes next. There is peace in understanding this continuity. It means that endings are never complete, that every act of decay feeds something new. The same is true for us. Our days, our stories, our small triumphs and struggles all become part of the greater rhythm that surrounds us. Like the rings of a tree, our moments overlap, each one circling the last, each one contributing to the shape of who we are becoming. The forest simply shows us this truth more clearly than we can often see it ourselves. In the stillness between one heartbeat and the next, the trees continue their slow work, writing the story of time with patient precision, one gentle circle after another, until even eternity feels calm. When night falls over a forest, the trees seem to grow even quieter, as if they are listening to the stars. Their trunks fade into silver outlines, and the air thickens with the scent of earth cooling after the long heat of the day. The wind moves gently through the branches, carrying whispers from the upper canopy to the forest floor. It is in this silence that the true rhythm of the trees becomes most clear. Beneath the surface, even in darkness, the slow exchange of life continues. Water rises from the roots, creeping upward through vessels thinner than hairs, while sugars made from yesterday's sunlight drift downward to feed the roots. Inside every trunk, time is still unfolding in rings too small to see, continuing the quiet work that began long before the first human ever looked up in wonder. Each tree carries its own relationship with time. Some grow quickly and burn bright with youth, while others linger, stretching their lives across centuries. In tropical forests, the rings can blur together where seasons never truly change, the rhythm softer and less distinct. In colder places, the pattern sharpens, each winter and summer drawing clear boundaries. Whether faint or bold, these lines are the footprints of survival. The tree does not seek perfection in symmetry. It grows according to what the world offers. A sudden frost, a summer of drought, or a flood that lasts too long will all leave their mark, and the wood keeps every one. It is the most honest autobiography nature ever wrote, a story without embellishment, only truth expressed in form and fiber. Over time, even the air inside the tree changes. The outer bark thickens, sealing away the old years, while the inner layers grow denser, turning pale sapwood into dark heartwood. The living cells retreat closer to the edges, circling the silent core. Yet the dead wood at the center is not wasted. It gives the trunk its strength. There is a quiet wisdom in that arrangement. Life surrounds what once was, leaning on its memory for stability. Perhaps that is what keeps the forest standing through storms that would flatten anything less patient. In the darkness, a soft light sometimes glows from fallen logs where fungi spread their threads. This faint luminescence, born from decay, is the forest's way of showing that nothing truly ends. The nutrients locked in wood return to the soil, feeding roots that will become new trees. Even the carbon held within the rings escapes back into the air, ready to be caught again by another leaf. Each ring that once marked a year of life becomes a circle in a much larger pattern. The forest breathes, grows, and fades in cycles so vast they can only be seen when we step back far enough to notice that it never really stops. If you listen long enough, the forest feels almost like a heartbeat. The wind in the leaves rises and falls. The creak of branches becomes a pulse, and the smell of rain in the soil feels like breath. Everything is connected through invisible rhythm, and the rings inside the trees are its most patient expression. To look upon them is to see time made gentle, to understand that growth and rest, creation and decay, are not opposites but partners. The forest does not fear change, because it is change, flowing slowly through centuries. Standing beneath the stars, the trees seem motionless, yet they are alive with quiet motion. Each cell inside them continues its slow dance of creation, turning air and sunlight into form. Even when we sleep, they are awake, adding one more thin circle to the story of the world. When morning comes, light will spill across their bark again, and the work will continue as it always has. That is the secret of the trees, and of the rings within them. They show that endurance is not a matter of resisting time, but of belonging to it completely. In their silence, they have already mastered what we spend lifetimes trying to learn. When morning light begins to drift through a forest, it lands first on the tops of the tallest trees. The leaves turn it into a golden haze, scattering brightness downward like a slow rain of warmth. The trunks glow faintly, and the forest begins to breathe again after the long stillness of night. It is in this quiet hour that the hidden life inside the wood resumes its patient rhythm. Beneath the bark, countless cells begin to stir, drawing water from the soil, pushing it upward through thin vessels that run like veins through the wood. The tree wakes without haste. It greets the day in silence, adding almost invisibly to the next ring that will one day mark this moment in time. The making of a tree ring is not dramatic. There is no sound or sign that the tree has begun to grow again. It happens molecule by molecule, cell by cell, in the soft layer between bark and heartwood. In spring, the cells form quickly, wide and thin-walled, to carry the abundance of water that rises from the melting ground. As the months warm, these cells grow denser, becoming the darker bands of summer and autumn. When the cold returns, growth halts completely and the tree rests. This alternating rhythm of motion and stillness forms the familiar pattern of rings, each one a complete cycle of life and pause. Together, they show how the tree lives not in constant striving, but in harmony with the turning world. Sometimes, if you look closely at a cut trunk, you can see where something unusual happened. A narrow ring might tell of a dry year when the rains failed. A distorted curve may reveal where the trunk leaned against a hillside, correcting its balance as it grew. A scar that curves inward like a crescent may mark the memory of lightning or frost, or an animal's scratch. The tree does not erase these marks. It grows around them, folding them into its body as part of its own story. Every imperfection becomes another detail in the sculpture of its life. There is beauty in that acceptance, in the way the tree does not hide what has hurt it, but transforms it into structure and strength. In places where forests have stood for thousands of years, the pattern of their rings tells a story longer than any human memory. Scientists can match the sequence of rings from living trees to the wood of ancient beams, and even to the trunks of trees long turned to stone. By fitting these patterns together, they can build a timeline that stretches back across millennia, connecting the present forest to its distant ancestors. Through this unbroken chain, we can learn when great droughts reshaped continents, when volcanoes dimmed the sun, when the climate changed so subtly that only the trees noticed. Their rings are the archives of the planet, a chronicle written in silence. But the forest does not think of itself as a record. It simply continues. The same cycles of light and shade that shaped the first trees still shape the ones standing now. The same chemistry that built the first ring of life still flows through their roots and leaves. To the trees, there is no difference between the past and the present. Time is not something they travel through, but something they create. Every year, the new growth pushes outward from the center, turning memory into motion. The living wood wraps around the old, protecting it, feeding from it, and adding another thin layer of now. As you stand among them, you can feel a trace of that rhythm. The air seems to pulse softly, not from sound, but from presence. Each trunk around you is quietly recording the day. The temperature of the morning, the moisture in the soil, even the breath you exhale becomes part of what it remembers. The forest is writing the story of this moment just as it has written all others. It asks nothing in return. It only continues, calm and patient, confident in the knowledge that growth never really ends. And perhaps, if we listen long enough, we might learn that same calm rhythm for ourselves, the art of adding one small circle of life at a time. As the day deepens and sunlight filters through the leaves in soft, shifting beams, the trees seem to settle into a rhythm of quiet work. The light warms the bark, wakes the sap within, and fills the air with the gentle sweetness of resin and living wood. Around the trunks, the air is alive with tiny movements, the rustle of small creatures, the flutter of wings, the delicate hum of insects tracing the invisible boundaries of sunlight and shade. Yet even in all that activity, the trees remain still. Their stillness is not emptiness, but attention. Inside, they are listening, collecting the details of the day, storing them deep within their rings as they have done for centuries. Each ring, no wider than the edge of a coin, is a memory of weather and light. A single one might hold the story of a long, dry summer, when the rivers shrank and leaves trembled for rain. Another might hold a tale of abundance, when the air was heavy with moisture and growth came easily. The rings do not forget. They keep a record of both struggle and ease, and in doing so, they teach that both belong to the same story. To read them is to see that time itself is not smooth, but textured, full of pauses and surges, hardships and reliefs. The beauty lies not in perfection, but in the wholeness of it all. Some trees, when viewed in cross-section, appear to spiral rather than form perfect circles. Their growth twists slightly year by year, following the pull of wind and sun. This spiral is not a flaw. It is the tree's way of adapting to its world, distributing strength so that it will not split under pressure. Even the most solid trunks carry within them a slow, graceful turn, proof that flexibility is as necessary to endurance as firmness. It is a quiet lesson written in wood. To live is to move gently with the forces around you, not against them. In the upper branches, light plays on the leaves and filters down in slow waves. What seems like still air is actually full of invisible motion. Water vapor rises from the soil, heat dances along the bark, and the tree releases tiny breaths of oxygen back into the sky. This exchange is constant and kind. The rings forming within the trunk depend on these unseen currents. The air, the soil, the water, the light, all of it contributes to the making of that single, thin layer of wood. Nothing is wasted, and nothing stands alone. Long after sunset, when the forest darkens again, the tree continues its work beneath the bark. The world cools, the insects quiet, and the sound of distant water takes their place. The growth slows but does not stop. Even in sleep, the tree adjusts itself to the rhythm of the night, repairing, redistributing, preparing for another dawn. By morning, the ring will have thickened just slightly, invisible progress that no one could have seen, but that changes everything. To think of time this way is comforting. It reminds us that progress need not be loud to be real. A tree grows not by sudden leaps, but through patience, through the steady layering of experience upon experience. It becomes vast and enduring by accepting the pace of the world and allowing itself to be shaped by it. When we rest our hands against a trunk, we touch a story that took centuries to write, a story told without hurry and without end. The rings beneath our palms are proof that life continues, quietly and faithfully, no matter how much the world rushes around it. In that silence, the trees hold a truth that feels older than language itself. That lasting growth happens gently, one circle at a time, in the calm rhythm of existence. In every forest there are trees so old that their centers have long since turned to hollows. Birds nest within them, owls sleep in their shade, and small animals find refuge in the caverns carved by time. Yet even with their centers gone, these trees still stand tall, leaves unfurling in spring and golding again in autumn. Their rings, once tight and firm, have softened and given way, but the pattern remains faintly visible on the walls of those inner chambers. To step close to such a tree is to stand beside a living monument, a reminder that age is not merely survival but transformation. The hollow trunk does not mean the tree is empty, it means the tree has learned to hold space for the world around it. When the sun filters through the leaves above, its light falls into the hollow, tracing the faint spirals of old growth. The warmth lingers on the edges of the wood, illuminating the gentle curve of each surviving ring. These rings are no longer flat pages of history, but sculpted reliefs, worn by wind, insects, and rain. Their texture is soft like the folds of old paper. In their patterns lie centuries of rhythm, each curve once a year of patience. The air inside feels cooler, heavier, and faintly sweet, like the breath of the forest itself. In the oldest trees, the heartwood often decays first, leaving a void while the outer layers continue to thrive. What was once the solid center of the tree becomes its quiet sanctuary. It is a strange kind of poetry, that something can lose its heart and yet continue to live. The rings that remain still carry water and nutrients, still move with the seasons. They do not mourn what is gone, they adapt to the new shape of life. The hollow becomes home to moss, to mushrooms, to small creatures that use it for shelter. Even decay feeds creation. What has been lost is never wasted. In this way, The forest shows how endings and beginnings exist side by side. A fallen branch feeds the soil that nourishes a sapling. A hollow trunk becomes the shelter that keeps another life safe through winter. The same rain that seeps into the cracks and wears away the old wood also nourishes the leaves high above. Every loss becomes a circle folded into another circle. The forest knows no finality. It only knows change. When people look at the rings of a tree, they often think of years and numbers, but perhaps the truer meaning is this rhythm of giving and receiving. Each ring is not only time passed but energy transformed, sunlight and water turned into form, form returned to soil. The tree is never simply growing, it is weaving itself into the life that surrounds it. It builds, it shares, it releases, and it begins again. Standing in such a place, it is easy to feel small, but not in a way that diminishes. It feels instead like being welcomed into something vast and kind. The hollow trees, the fallen logs, the whispering canopy above, they are all part of one conversation that has continued for longer than any single life. The rings that once pulsed with sap now echo softly in the stillness, speaking a language of patience and renewal. They tell us that strength does not always mean solidity, that beauty can exist in imperfection, and that even the oldest hollows can still hold light. To walk away from that hollow and look back once more is to see the forest as it truly is, not frozen in age, but endlessly alive, full of gentle continuity. The rings of every tree, living or fallen, are threads in that larger fabric, each one shimmering faintly in the soft breath of time. When a tree falls in the forest, it does not vanish into silence. It shifts from one form of life into another. The trunk that once reached toward the sky now rests on the earth, slowly becoming part of it again. The bark softens under the rain, the rings inside darken, and the scent of living wood transforms into something rich and damp. Moss begins to spread along its surface, tiny green threads weaving through the cracks. Insects arrive first, carving small tunnels through the wood, followed by beetles, worms, and fungi that glow faintly at night. Together they begin the patient work of returning the tree to soil. It is not an end, but a gentle surrender, a reunion with the ground that once raised it. Even after it falls, the tree's rings continue to speak. The wood may be cracked, but each circle remains, a map of the world as it once was. The wider rings tell of generous years, the narrow ones of struggle. In the cross-section, it is possible to see centuries compressed into a single surface. To trace those lines with your fingers is to travel backward through storms and summers, through nights of frost and mornings of light. A single trunk holds the memory of hundreds of seasons. Even as it softens and breaks apart, that memory lingers, feeding the earth beneath it with what it has learned. In the stillness of decay there is a kind of grace. The fallen tree nourishes new life with its remains. Seeds take root in the damp hollows of its bark. Mushrooms rise from its shadows. Tiny ferns and saplings use its surface as a bed from which to reach toward the Sunday. In a few decades, what was once a single tree becomes a small forest of its own. The circle continues. The same minerals that once built its rings now flow through the roots of new growth, and the story that began in one life quietly unfolds into many. For scientists, these fallen trees are like open books. By studying their rings, researchers can learn about centuries of weather and soil, about fires that swept through the valley or floods that shaped the river. Each line holds data, but more than that, it holds presence. It holds the rhythm of how the earth breathes. Dendrochronology is not just a science of measurement, it is a science of memory. Through it, we can listen to how the planet has changed and how it continues to change. The rings tell us that the earth is not still, that even what seems permanent is always in motion. To sit beside a fallen trunk is to feel that motion, slow and deep, almost beneath perception. You can hear it in the hum of insects, in the faint crackle of decomposing wood, in the whisper of wind that moves through the hollow. It is a reminder that stillness is not the absence of life, but its continuation in another form. The tree does not resist this transformation. It gives itself fully to the cycle that made it. From dust to seed, from seed to tree, from tree to soil, and from soil to life again, the pattern repeats. The forest accepts this truth easily. Its floor is layered with the memories of generations, each one giving rise to the next. A young sapling growing beside a fallen trunk may one day fall in the same place, and its own rings will join the chorus. There is no sadness in this, only rhythm. The forest does not mourn what it loses, because it never truly loses anything. Everything that falls becomes part of what rises. The rings may fade, but their meaning remains, flowing through the veins of roots and rivers alike. To walk through such a place is to walk through time itself, surrounded by the soft persistence of life that refuses to end, only to change its shape and begin again. If you stand at the edge of a forest just before dawn, you can feel the world preparing to awaken. The air is cool and still, and a faint mist curls among the trunks. The trees seem motionless, yet they are already at work. Within their roots, water begins to rise, and inside their bark, the first molecules of light are being translated into energy. The forest hums so softly that you can only sense it through stillness. This is the hour when everything seems to pause between night and day, and even the trees appear to breathe slower. Their rings, deep within their hearts, continue their invisible growth, keeping pace with the turning earth. Each tree ring begins as an act of faith. A tree cannot know what the coming year will bring. It does not know if storms will break its branches, if the rains will be kind, or if fire will sweep through the valley. Yet still it grows, sending its tender cells outward to embrace the future. These first new cells are delicate, easily damaged, yet without them there would be no strength. Every ring begins in vulnerability and ends in resilience. When we look at the cross-section of a trunk, we are seeing not only age but courage repeated hundreds of times. The first light of day slides through the canopy, and the leaves shimmer like coins. They open to drink in sunlight, to begin again the long conversation between earth and sky. The same exchange happens within every cell of wood. The sap rises, bringing nutrients from the roots, while the sugars made by light flow downward to feed what lies below. The tree is a bridge between two worlds, carrying the messages of each to the other. Its rings record this dialogue with quiet precision, storing the balance between nourishment and restraint, abundance and struggle. Sometimes, when the morning wind moves through the leaves, the sound is so gentle it feels like the forest is speaking. The whisper seems to come not from the leaves themselves but from something older beneath them, something that has been listening for centuries. The trees, with their rings layered deep beneath the bark, hold that sound the way they hold the seasons. Their branches stretch outward to collect the light, while their hearts remain rooted in the dark. There is wisdom in that shape, a lesson in how to stay open and grounded at once. As the day brightens, the scent of pine and soil begins to rise. Sunlight touches the trunks and reveals the faint patterns of bark, each crack a map of time. The rings inside mirror those lines, tighter near the base, wider where the seasons were kind. They show how even the tallest giants once began as fragile stems, their stories written slowly, one year after another. In this light, the forest feels timeless. It does not rush or measure its worth in growth alone. Its purpose seems simpler, to continue existing with grace. When evening comes again, the same trees will stand in the same silence, their rings a little thicker than before, their patience a little deeper. The air will cool, and mist will drift once more through the undergrowth. Somewhere, the first stars will appear, and their faint light will rest upon the leaves. The forest will begin its slow exhale, releasing what it has gathered through the day. Time will move on, and the trees will keep marking it in circles, each one a quiet testimony to endurance and trust. Within those rings lies the story of the world, written in patience and light, always continuing, always beginning again. Far from the cities, where the nights are still dark enough to reveal the stars, a forest seems to exist in a different kind of time. The air moves slowly there, and sound carries softly between the trunks. Even footsteps become quieter, absorbed by the moss and the layers of fallen leaves. In that quiet, the trees appear eternal. Their branches move gently with the wind, their roots sink deep into the soil, and within them, the invisible work continues. The rings hidden beneath their bark expand with a patience that feels beyond human understanding. Each one is a mark of life continuing, of the world turning, of the earth breathing through its oldest inhabitants. If you were to walk among those trees at night, you might sense how alive the darkness really is. The scent of damp bark and distant rain hangs in the air. You might hear the soft drop of water from a branch, or the call of a night bird echoing between the trunks. The forest does not sleep. It simply shifts into a slower rhythm. Beneath the ground, roots continue to exchange signals and nutrients. Fungi glow faintly in the soil, connecting the trees in a hidden web of sharing. This secret world beneath our feet is as intricate as the stars above, and every tree ring mirrors it in its quiet symmetry. When a new year begins, the first pale layer of wood forms in silence. It is born from the faint memory of the seasons that came before it. The tree builds upon what it has already lived, expanding outward while carrying everything it has ever known at its center. The heartwood holds the memory of youth. The outer rings hold the promise of what is still to come. Together they form a record that is at once personal and universal. In the same way that starlight takes years to reach our eyes, each tree holds the light of many distant summers within its grain. Sometimes the forest seems to whisper lessons we already know but often forget. The trees do not chase time, they allow it to move through them. Their growth is neither hurried nor idle. They live in response to what the world gives, shaping themselves according to the rhythm of sunlight and storm. When one tree falls, others bend slightly to fill the space it leaves behind. Nothing is wasted, and nothing is truly gone. The fallen trunk feeds the soil, which feeds the roots, which feed the leaves, which capture the light again. In that endless exchange, time is not a straight path but a circle, layered like the rings themselves. When dawn begins to soften the edges of the night, a faint glow spreads through the forest. The leaves glisten with dew, and the trunks glimmer like silver in the half-light. Somewhere in that moment, another invisible layer begins to form within the trees. It happens quietly, almost shyly, but it continues the same pattern that has guided forests for millions of years. Every tree becomes a witness to this endless renewal, and every ring within it holds a fragment of the universe's calm persistence. To touch the bark of an old tree is to touch that rhythm. It feels rough and cool, but beneath that texture lies the memory of everything that has passed. The forest holds no clock, yet it knows time better than we do. Each circle of growth is a breath, each hollow a pause, each scar a lesson. The trees ask for nothing, yet they give everything: shelter, air, beauty, and the steady reminder that growth can be both strong and gentle. Their rings are proof that life's greatest strength lies not in speed, but in the quiet certainty that everything continues. As the seasons pass, a forest does not rush to change. Its rhythm is too old, too deep, to be hurried. Spring arrives quietly, unfolding one leaf at a time. The air softens, the light lingers longer, and beneath the soil, roots stir with the return of warmth. Water moves upward again, pulled by the promise of new growth. Every tree answers this signal in its own way, each responding to the same invitation with its own pace. The rings forming inside them begin to widen as life resumes its steady cycle. Though it happens without sound, this is the moment when the world renews itself. Each ring that takes shape in the heart of a tree is a circle of memory and resilience. The tree does not think of the future or cling to the past. It simply continues to grow where it stands, translating sunlight and water into wood, turning the unseen into something solid. The early wood that forms in spring is pale and soft, built quickly to carry the rush of water from the roots to the branches. As the months stretch into summer, the wood darkens and tightens, becoming stronger, slower, more deliberate. When autumn comes and the chill creeps into the air, the tree prepares to rest. It draws its energy inward, sealing off the new layer with a thin boundary that will one day appear as a dark line in its rings. And then, when winter stills the world, the tree waits. What is remarkable is how the tree never resists these changes. It does not mourn the loss of leaves or fear the cold. It simply trusts that spring will return. Within its trunk, the layers of years remain, each one a testimony to that quiet faith. When we look at the cross-section of a tree, we are seeing the record of endurance written in the language of patience. Wide rings mark years of abundance, narrow ones mark struggle, but all of them belong to the same story. The tree carries both equally, without judgment. Sometimes a storm will bend a trunk or snap a branch, and the wound will leave a scar deep within the wood. The next rings will form around that scar, curling to protect it, weaving new growth around old pain. Over time, the injury becomes part of the tree's design. From the outside, it may look like a twist or a curve in the bark, but inside it is strength, a reminder that even what hurts can shape something lasting. There is beauty in that honesty. A tree never hides its history, it becomes it. Walking among trees that have seen centuries can feel like standing in the presence of quiet wisdom. Their stillness is not emptiness but attention. The air feels thicker around them, as if carrying the weight of all the seasons they have lived through. The ground beneath them is soft with their fallen leaves, each one another small offering to the cycle they serve. Even the smallest sapling rising nearby carries that same rhythm within it, the same pattern waiting to unfold. In the end, every tree ring tells us what it means to live in harmony with time. It is not about speed or competition, but about constancy and balance. It is about growing through every season with grace, accepting both light and shadow. The trees do not measure their worth by their height or age, but by their quiet participation in the ongoing story of the earth. And when we pause long enough to listen, to run our hands along their trunks, and feel the faint pulse of life beneath the bark, we begin to hear the same rhythm in ourselves. The steady, unhurried beat of existence, circling endlessly, ring after ring, reminding us that all of life is connected through the simple act of continuing. In the golden light of late afternoon, a forest becomes a kind of living cathedral. The trunks rise like pillars, the canopy glows like stained glass, and the air hums softly with the low, patient energy of things that have endured. The ground feels alive beneath the feet, cushioned by centuries of fallen leaves. Each leaf that decays becomes food for the next generation. Each tree that grows adds another layer to the forest's quiet memory. Within the heart of those trees, deep beneath the bark, the rings continue their slow conversation with time. They do not rush to finish their sentences. They simply add one more circle, one more thought, to the endless story. The light filters through the branches in long golden strands, and the smell of resin mingles with the scent of soil. The air is thick and warm, carrying the faint sweetness of pine and the salt of the nearby earth. The trees seem to breathe with the same rhythm as the world around them. Within each trunk, a steady movement of water and sugar flows upward and downward, linking root to leaf, soil to sky. That movement leaves its trace in the rings forming within. Each year, another line is added to this invisible map of time. The forest grows older, but it never feels tired. Its age is not a weight, but a foundation. The rings of a tree record more than weather and growth. They hold the memory of sound, of vibration, of rhythm. When the wind moves through a forest, it does more than rustle the leaves. It resonates through the wood itself, traveling down the trunk and into the roots. Over centuries, those subtle patterns of vibration leave their signature in the grain. Scientists have discovered that the density of certain rings can reveal not only climate but even the frequency of wind. The tree, without meaning to, becomes a musician. Its rings are the score, written slowly by nature's own rhythm. Every forest, then, is an orchestra of silent instruments playing the same ancient song. To sit against a tree and listen to the world around it is to tune yourself to that same tempo. The heartbeat slows, thoughts drift, and suddenly the rush of hours feels like something far away. The tree does not divide time into minutes or years. It experiences it as a gentle unfolding, a continuity that knows no hurry. Inside its trunk, the boundaries between past and present blur. The rings of youth are still there, layered beneath the newer ones, alive in the strength they continue to lend. The old and the new are not separate things. They are one body, one story, one shape. As the sun lowers behind the hills, the light becomes softer, and shadows stretch across the forest floor. The trees glow faintly, as if lit from within. Their roots twist among the stones, holding firm in the soil that once held other forests long ago. Each trunk stands as a witness to the passing of countless generations, to the return of seasons that have come and gone more times than any living creature could count. Yet the trees remain. They do not compete with the years, they simply receive them. When darkness finally gathers and the last rays of sunlight fade, the forest grows still once more. The wind softens, and the only sound left is the quiet pulse of life within the wood. The rings of each tree hold the entire day within them, the warmth of sunlight, the coolness of night, the scent of rain and the echo of distant storms. Every line is a chapter written in patience, every circle a hymn to endurance. The trees have no need to remember because they never forget. They keep their stories alive within them, growing outward in calm, steady spirals that will continue long after we are gone. In their silent expansion, they remind us of what time truly is, not something we chase, but something that unfolds with us, softly, without end. There is a particular peace that settles over a forest after rain. The air feels heavier, touched by the sweetness of wet bark and the faint metallic scent of earth. Droplets cling to the ends of leaves, catching light and turning every branch into a string of trembling jewels. Beneath the canopy, the sound is muted. Water falls from one layer of leaves to another, soft as a heartbeat. Every tree seems to breathe more deeply, its roots drinking from the softened ground. Inside each trunk, that nourishment becomes part of the slow process that builds the next ring. What began as clouds and storms now transforms into wood, another thin line in the long spiral of existence. When rain falls in a forest, it connects everything. It seeps through moss and roots, down into the soil where old leaves have turned to humus, and then farther still into the deep channels carved by roots over centuries. The water finds its way into every crevice, filling the network that binds one tree to another. In time, some of it will rise again, pulled upward by invisible currents through the xylem, until it reaches the highest leaves. There it will meet the sunlight and vanish back into air. This constant movement, from sky to soil to sky again, mirrors the pattern of the rings themselves. Each ring is a cycle made visible, a testimony to the balance between giving and receiving. After the rain, the trunks gleam. The bark darkens, and the scent of resin grows strong. You can almost feel the trees drawing in the moisture through their roots, translating it into growth that will be measured not in days but in years. Somewhere deep within, in the thin layer between living bark and heartwood, new cells divide and expand. They build the framework that will one day appear as another circle in the wood. The tree does not notice this act of creation. It simply continues its work, trusting the rhythm of the world to guide it. The light that follows a storm has its own magic. Sunbeams break through the clouds and scatter across the wet leaves, turning the air into a haze of gold. Mist rises from the ground and curls around the trunks. In that mist, the world feels softer, slower, almost timeless. The forest has been washed clean, and every surface glows with newness. Yet beneath that freshness lies history, preserved in the rings of every tree around you. Each trunk contains the memory of countless storms, of seasons that began and ended long before this one. The trees carry those memories not as burdens but as blessings, lessons of endurance etched into their bones. When the sun finally dips low and the forest begins to cool again, the rings inside the trees continue their silent work. The cells that were filled with water will soon thicken and strengthen, locking moisture into structure. The outer bark will dry, but the memory of rain will remain sealed within. Every storm leaves a trace, even if it cannot be seen. The same water that fell today may become part of a new layer of wood tomorrow, and centuries from now, someone studying that tree might read this rain in its pattern. The trees are always recording, though they never keep score. As the evening light fades, the air grows still. The last drops fall from the canopy and disappear into the ground. A faint mist lingers above the soil like breath. Somewhere inside the forest, another circle is forming, invisible but certain. The trees are not hurrying. They never do. They grow with the patience of rain, trusting that every drop matters. Each ring they form is a quiet echo of that truth. Every storm becomes a story, every pause a promise, and every moment of light another memory folded gently into wood. In the hush that follows, you can almost hear it, the slow and constant pulse of time itself, written softly in circles beneath the skin of the trees. When winter settles across the forest, the air becomes still enough to hear the quietest sounds. The leaves have long since fallen, leaving only the soft rustle of dry branches moving against one another. Frost gathers on the bark and glitters faintly in the pale light. The forest feels both asleep and awake at the same time, caught in a delicate pause between endings and beginnings. Beneath the snow, the roots rest. The trees appear motionless, yet inside them, something continues. It is slower now, deeper, quieter, but not gone. The rings that have been forming all year are sealed at their edges, closing another chapter in the life of the tree. The work of growth will wait until spring, but the story never stops. Winter is the season when the trees remind the world that stillness is part of living. Without the constant green of leaves, their shapes are exposed, and every branch reveals the choices of the years before. You can see how storms bent them, how sunlight shaped their reach. The forest becomes a sculpture of time itself, each trunk a record of decisions made in silence. Snow piles softly on the branches and melts slowly under the weak sunday. The sound it makes as it falls is gentle, like a whisper landing on the ground. The air smells of cold resin and old wood, sharp but comforting. Inside the trees, life continues in a slower rhythm. The sap has thickened, moving with the consistency of honey. It no longer rises quickly through the trunk but settles into small pools, waiting for warmth to return. The cells that will become the next ring are already in place, fragile and new, held in suspension by the cold. The tree rests, but it does not sleep. It listens. It measures the length of daylight through its branches, sensing when the light will begin to lengthen again. Even in the deepest frost, there is awareness, a soft preparation for the thaw. The forest in winter feels eternal. The horizon disappears behind drifting snow, and every sound seems to come from far away. Yet if you look closely, you can see how alive it still is. Birds hop from branch to branch, their small movements stirring the still air. The tracks of animals weave between trunks, tracing paths through the white. A thin mist sometimes rises, where the snow meets warmer earth, curling through the air like smoke. Beneath it all, the trees continue their quiet endurance. Their rings, sealed and resting, hold the warmth of every summer they have ever known. When the first thaw comes, it is almost imperceptible. The snow begins to soften at its edges, drops of water fall from branches and land with soft sounds on the ground. The air tastes faintly of moisture again. The trees begin to stir as light returns, the sap thinning, the new growth readying itself. Soon the next ring will begin to form, but for now, the forest is content in its stillness. It is teaching that rest is not an interruption but part of the cycle itself. To walk through a winter forest is to walk through the heart of time. Every sound and silence carries weight. The snow records your footsteps just as the wood records the years. The rings within the trees hold the memory of summers long past, and even now, beneath the cold, the next one waits to begin. The trees know how to wait without worry. They trust that spring will return. Their patience is absolute, and their quiet confidence fills the air like a steady breath. In their stillness lies a lesson as old as the earth itself, that growth requires rest, that time is kind to those who let it unfold, and that even in the silence of winter, life is preparing its next circle of warmth and light. When spring finally returns, the forest feels like it is breathing again. The snow melts slowly into the soil, and water begins to flow through the roots once more. The sound of dripping fills the quiet places, echoing faintly through the trunks like a melody only the trees can hear. Sunlight filters through the bare branches, touching the ground that has slept for months. Tiny shoots push through the cold earth, their colors bright against the dull remnants of winter. Every drop of thawed water carries the memory of ice, and every new leaf carries the memory of patience. The forest begins to wake, and with it, the trees begin to write again upon themselves, one faint line at a time. The first ring of the new year starts with softness. In early spring, when the days are still short and the air still sharp, the cells that form in the trunk are large and thin, made for carrying the flood of water rushing upward from the roots. The tree is hungry for light and warmth, eager to draw in everything it has been denied. These wide, pale bands in the wood are the record of renewal, the first breath after a long silence. The tree does not know what the year will bring, yet it grows anyway, trusting that even in uncertainty, life will find its way forward. The forest at this time hums with quiet determination. Buds unfurl at the tips of branches, each one delicate and bright. The smell of damp earth rises with the morning mist, and the low hum of insects returns, threading through the air like music. The trees respond to the growing light with a steady rhythm. Water climbs through their trunks, feeding the leaves that will soon spread wide to catch the sunday. Every cell that forms becomes a line in the wood. Every day, a moment in the circle of time. The rings build themselves with quiet precision, marking not just the passage of days but the faith that makes the days possible. When rain falls in spring, it carries with it a sense of forgiveness. The forest soaks it in with gratitude. The trunks darken and gleam, and the new green deepens to richer tones. Every storm that passes leaves behind not destruction but renewal. The trees have learned to bend with the wind rather than resist it, to accept the rhythm of the sky. The rings that form in these months will be broad and strong, symbols of abundance after hardship. There is a tenderness to spring growth that feels almost human. The forest holds a kind of hope that cannot be forced or hurried. Each trunk, each branch, each unfolding leaf carries the quiet courage to begin again. In this patience, there is a wisdom that speaks without words. The trees remind us that beginnings do not erase what came before, they add to it. The new ring does not cover the old, it wraps around it, protecting it, carrying it forward. As the season deepens, the forest glows with color and sound. The air fills with the scent of blooming flowers and young leaves warming in the sunday. Streams rush freely again, singing against stones that had been locked in ice. Everything seems to expand, yet nothing rushes. The trees continue their work in silence, their branches alive with birds and new light. Somewhere inside them, the first ring of the year thickens almost imperceptibly, a promise being fulfilled. If you stand quietly long enough, you can feel that same rhythm in your own breath. The renewal of spring is not just for the forest. It is a reminder that everything, even what has endured the longest winters, can find its way back to life. The trees know this. They have known it forever. Their rings are made from that certainty, from the steady truth that growth and rest, death and return, are all parts of the same endless circle. And as the sun warms the earth once again, they stand in patient joy, living proof that to begin again is the oldest and most natural thing in the world. As summer stretches across the forest, the air grows thick and warm, and every living thing seems to move at a slower, steadier rhythm. The leaves shimmer with light, the soil breathes moisture, and the trunks of the trees radiate a quiet strength. Somewhere deep within them, the new rings that began in spring continue to form. The cells are smaller now, their walls denser, shaped by the rising heat and the steady pace of growth. The forest hums softly in this fullness, content but focused, a world alive with patient labor. The days are long, and the sunlight lingers far into the evening. The trees take in everything they can, their leaves turning toward the light like green sails catching a warm wind. Through every trunk, a quiet pulse moves upward, carrying water to the branches and nutrients back down to the roots. This circulation is the heartbeat of the forest, unseen yet constant. Within each tree, that rhythm translates into form, line upon line, layer upon layer, another chapter written in the slow language of rings. If you look closely at the bark in summer, you can see the faint shimmer of life beneath it. The cambium, that thin living layer between bark and wood, is at its most active now. It builds new cells, fortifying the tree against the weight of time. Though we cannot see it, the work is ceaseless. In a single season, thousands of cells divide, expand, and harden, creating the structure that will hold the tree upright through years to come. Growth in summer is less a surge and more a deepening. The wood darkens as the days pass, its fibers thickening, its pattern tightening into strength. Around the trees, the forest vibrates with sound. The hum of insects rises and falls like waves. Birds call from hidden branches, and the rustle of small creatures echoes through the undergrowth. Every sound seems to belong to the same steady rhythm, woven into the same quiet music. Even the wind moves differently now, soft and heavy with heat. It brushes against the leaves and carries the scent of pine, soil, and sun-warmed resin. It is the scent of life in balance, of energy being stored, of growth that knows it cannot last forever but continues anyway. By midsummer, the forest feels timeless. The light filters through the canopy in golden sheets, scattering on the ground in shifting patterns. The trees stand as they always have, patient and tall, their branches heavy with shade. Within them, the rings that have been forming since spring now near completion. The cells produced in these long, warm days will form the darker bands of late wood, a boundary that will one day mark the year's end. Yet for now, the trees are unaware of time's passage. They live entirely in the present moment, working with the sunlight they have, responding to the wind that moves through them, rooted deeply in both memory and now. When the sun finally begins to sink low in the evening sky, the forest changes again. Shadows stretch across the ground, and the temperature drops just enough to cool the leaves. The sounds fade to a quiet hum. The air feels thick and golden, as though the light itself has weight. The trees release some of the water they've gathered, letting it drift into the air as mist. That mist rises above the canopy and joins the clouds that will one day return as rain. The cycle continues, seamless and sure. In this endless exchange, the trees remain both students and teachers of time. Their rings are formed from the patience of summer, from the quiet understanding that growth does not come from striving but from presence. Every drop of sunlight, every gust of wind, every hour of stillness becomes part of their shape. When we stand among them, we too can feel that slow rhythm moving through us, a reminder that time, like light, is not something to hold but something to inhabit. Summer in the forest is not a pause between beginnings and endings. It is the living heart of the year, full and steady, written in wood, breath, and warmth, one circle at a time. As summer begins to lean toward autumn, the light in the forest changes. It loses its sharpness and takes on a golden hue that lingers softly on the bark and leaves. The air feels different too, carrying both warmth and the faint coolness of what is coming. The forest sighs in long, slow breaths, and every sound seems deeper. The trees have spent months drawing in sunlight, feeding the life within their trunks, and now they begin to ease their rhythm. Inside them, the newest ring nears completion. It thickens slowly as the days shorten, darkening in tone, firming in texture. The trees know how to prepare for rest without rushing. They do not hurry to finish. They simply allow the season to complete its quiet circle. The leaves begin to turn, first at the edges, then across the whole canopy. Greens deepen into amber, bronze, and red. Each color seems to flicker in the changing light, like fire in slow motion. The forest becomes a mosaic of fading summer and arriving autumn. Every step through it sounds softer now. The ground, cushioned with fallen leaves, carries the scent of earth and time. In this season, the forest is both alive and reflective. The trees are still growing, but they are also remembering. The rings within them hold every season that has ever passed, and as another one ends, that memory deepens. Inside the trunks, the movement of water begins to slow. The days are still warm enough for the leaves to breathe, but at night the air cools, and the flow retreats toward the roots. The tree begins to store what it needs for the long months ahead. The last of the growth for the year solidifies, creating a boundary that will one day appear as a dark, fine line in its wood. It is not a line of ending but of rest. The tree is not closing itself off. It is gathering strength. It is learning to pause, to hold still, to trust that life continues even when motion stops. As the forest deepens into autumn, the air fills with the sound of wind moving through dry leaves. The sound is soft but layered, like the low murmur of a distant sea. Birds move restlessly above, some preparing to leave, others gathering what remains of summer. The light slants lower each day, and shadows stretch longer. The forest glows in the afternoon and cools into quiet at dusk. Beneath the surface, unseen and unhurried, the final touches of the year's ring form in perfect silence. The changing of seasons has no sharp beginning or end here. It blends in waves, a conversation between warmth and cold. The forest never fights this change. It allows it. The trees bend slightly with the wind, letting go of what they no longer need. Each falling leaf is a gesture of release, gentle and graceful. Even in letting go, there is purpose. The leaves will rest on the ground, turning into the soil that will one day feed new growth. The forest is never wasteful. It understands that endings are part of creation. By the time the last light of day settles through the branches, the forest is quiet again. The air has cooled, the sky has dimmed, and the trees stand calm beneath the fading glow. The new ring inside each trunk is now complete. It is sealed at the edges, holding within it the entire memory of a year, its rains, its droughts, its sunlight, and its stillness. Another chapter has been written in the slow, unhurried language of wood. If you place your hand on the bark of a tree in this season, you might feel the faint hum of that story beneath your palm. It is the rhythm of patience, of time taking its natural course. The tree does not cling to what was, or reach desperately for what is next. It simply exists, full of the quiet knowledge that life moves in circles, not lines. The new ring will rest through winter, waiting to cradle the one that comes after. And so the forest continues, not by striving, but by trusting that the rhythm of the earth will always carry it forward, one soft season at a time. As autumn deepens, the forest becomes a living tapestry of color and sound. The days grow shorter, and the sun drifts lower across the horizon, brushing the canopy with a light that feels more like memory than presence. The air cools, and the scents of pine, moss, and fallen leaves rise together, filling the forest with the fragrance of change. The trees, long patient in their work, begin their slow surrender to the coming cold. The leaves that once caught sunlight now drift quietly to the ground, each one a final offering from the year that has passed. Beneath their bark, the trees are busy in silence, preparing for the long rest that lies ahead. Inside the trunk, the last work of the growing season is nearly complete. The rings formed during spring and summer are firm now, the new wood darkening as it strengthens. The flow of sap slows to a careful trickle, gathering at the roots where it will be kept safe from the frost. The tree draws inward, conserving its energy, yet even in this withdrawal, it continues to give. The fallen leaves enrich the soil, feeding the earth that will one day feed the tree again. Every act of letting go becomes an act of renewal. The forest knows how to give back to itself. As the wind moves through the bare branches, the sound is hollow and soft. It carries a kind of music that belongs only to this season, a low and steady hum that seems to echo the turning of the world. Sunlight flickers through the remaining leaves, creating a slow dance of shadows on the forest floor. Small animals gather what they can before the cold arrives, their quick movements contrasting with the calm patience of the trees. Even as life prepares for sleep, it remains full of motion. The forest does not stop, it only shifts. When rain falls in late autumn, it lands differently. It does not feed growth, but cleanses what has already finished. The droplets cling to the branches, glistening like glass, then slide down the bark in silver trails. The water seeps into the soil, carrying the essence of the season with it. That water will rest through winter's freeze and rise again in spring, carrying the memory of this moment into the next cycle. Every drop is part of the long conversation between sky and root, between what is above and what is below. The rings within the trees listen to that conversation and record it without judgment, holding it in silence. The forest at dusk feels timeless. The colors deepen into copper and umber, and a faint mist begins to settle near the ground. The air is still, and the trees stand as they have for centuries, unwavering in their acceptance of change. They do not cling to their leaves or resist the turning of the seasons. They allow the world to move through them, trusting that their strength lies in their ability to yield. Within their trunks, the newest ring of growth is sealed now, a dark, polished line that marks another completed year. Each tree holds its own collection of these circles, each one a memory of a year lived in light and shadow, in storm and calm. Together, they create a record of time that is far older and more truthful than any human history. The forest does not measure time by calendars or clocks. It knows time through texture, through scent, through the slow layering of years. Every ring tells the story of a season, and every trunk holds the quiet truth that nothing truly ends, it only transforms. As night falls, the forest becomes a silhouette against the sky. The last of the leaves rustles softly, and the wind carries their sound into the dark. Beneath the soil, the roots rest, wrapped in the warmth of the earth. Above, the stars shimmer faintly through the thinning canopy. The trees stand between these two worlds, connecting the heavens and the ground, holding both in balance. Their rings are their memory of that balance, written in stillness, preserved in patience. Each one is a quiet promise that life continues, even in the fading light, always returning, always beginning again. When winter finally settles in, the forest grows quiet enough to hear the smallest things. The snow falls in slow, deliberate flakes, covering the ground in a soft white layer that muffles every sound. The air is cool and still, heavy with the scent of pine and frozen earth. The trees stand motionless, their branches bare, their trunks dark against the pale landscape. At first glance, it may seem as though the forest has fallen into sleep, but within every trunk, life continues in slow motion. Deep beneath the bark, in the thin living layer between wood and skin, the story of another year waits to begin. The rings formed through the warmer months now rest, sealed at their edges. Each tree has completed its work for the year, adding another circle to the long spiral of its life. The newest layer, thin and dark, holds the memory of every sunrise, storm, and shadow that passed across the forest. It is a year's worth of patience turned solid. Beneath that layer lies a library of centuries. To cut through the trunk of an ancient tree is to open a window into time itself, to see how the earth once felt in the years before we arrived. The rings tell of rain and drought, of fire and recovery, of balance and renewal. They are the closest thing nature has to handwriting, written not in ink but in the quiet language of growth. In winter, the trees pause. The rush of sap slows, the roots rest, and the forest breathes in long, steady intervals. Even the wind seems gentler now, brushing the branches instead of bending them. Snow gathers on the limbs and forms small white mounds along the bark, softening the sharpness of their shapes. The weight of the snow is not a burden, it is part of the rhythm. When it melts, it will become the first drink of spring, feeding the same roots that sleep beneath the frozen ground. The trees accept this balance without thought. Their stillness is not emptiness, it is trust. When sunlight returns in the late afternoon, it falls in narrow beams through the bare canopy, turning the snow to silver. The light lingers briefly before fading into the blue-gray calm of evening. Somewhere in the distance, the call of a bird echoes through the trees, reminding the forest that movement never fully stops. Beneath the soil, the roots remain alive, sharing water and quiet signals with one another, waiting for the warmth that will start their work again. The trees are not impatient. They know how to wait, how to keep living even in stillness. If you were to press your ear against the trunk of one of these winter giants, you might hear nothing, yet something within you would recognize the sound of time. It is not a voice but a feeling, a hum that exists just below silence. It is the whisper of years passing in circles, of life continuing quietly, of patience turned to permanence. The tree is never truly asleep. It is simply holding space for the next chapter. When spring comes again, the rings will begin to grow once more, each new circle wrapping gently around the old. The pattern will continue long after we are gone, long after our own stories have become part of the soil. In the end, the forest teaches that nothing living is ever lost. The trees remember everything, the light, the water, the wind, and they hold it all in stillness until it becomes part of them. The rings inside their trunks are the pulse of the earth itself, eternal and unbroken, reminding us that time is not a race to the end, but a rhythm that never truly stops. So, as you drift toward sleep, remember that every forest is quietly keeping time, that beneath the bark of even the smallest tree, history is still unfolding in silence. The rings do not rush, they do not falter, they simply grow, one after another, marking the slow, steady heartbeat of the planet. The next time you walk beneath the trees, perhaps you'll hear it, that ancient rhythm, still pulsing beneath your feet. Sleep well, dream deeply, and let your thoughts grow soft and circular, like rings in wood. Let me know in the comments where you're listening from tonight.